We have breaking news out of the Middle East in Lebanon, in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Not moments ago, Israel struck a major attack against another high-ranking Hezbollah commander. He was killed. This is Ibrahim Akil, I think is the pronunciation there. Somebody that they've been going after for quite some time. He's one of the senior commanders, the second major commander of the Hezbollah military wing to be assassinated by Israel in Beirut in the last couple of months. And this is probably a continuation of really what I believe, my assessment is what I've been seeing and what I'm going to show you here today is the beginning of Israel's war into Lebanon. I think that probably we're about to see an incursion and they're going to open up a complete northern front in their war. I think that's a dreadful mistake for Israel. I think it's got so much possibility for negative results for them. It didn't go very well the last time they tried this, and there's every reason to think it could be even worse this time. But that remains to be seen. But what we can tell you for sure is that there has been a substantial escalation in the fighting in the north by Israel against Hezbollah. So this airstrike that you're seeing some stuff from there, this is something that literally just happened. But overnight, this happened.
In the Middle East, Israel launched fresh airstrikes across southern Lebanon overnight in what security sources there say was some of the most intense bombing since the start of the war in Gaza in October. These are the latest pictures of Israeli strikes on the southern Lebanese border village of Rihan. The Israeli military says its warplanes struck more than 100 Hezbollah sites, including a weapons storage facility.
When you take a look at the combination of events that have been unfolding in just rapid succession over the last few days, you first of all had the open statement by the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, that said we're in a new phase of this war, and we're now going to focus on the north because there's, as I've mentioned before, the Netanyahu government is coming under enormous pressure, political pressure from these about 100,000 Israeli people who have been driven out of their homes in the north of the country because of the rocket and artillery threat from Hezbollah in the north. And they want to go home. And so they're putting pressure on him to end it. Now, he could choose negotiations and diplomacy because the Hezbollah side has said from day one, literally from the 8th of October of last year forward, that all of their attacks are in support of the Palestinians in Gaza, because as long as the Israeli forces are fighting in the Gaza Strip and killing lots of Palestinians, they're going to defend them and at least be on their side by firing these weapons. So if there was a ceasefire, Hezbollah has indicated that they would also cease their rocket attacks into Israel, and then the people could go home. That's one method. But Netanyahu doesn't seem to want to take that method. Instead, he wants to have a military victory. So they officially changed about several days ago that said, we now have a war goal, and that was the terminology was very important because they said they're now going to orient to the north so that they can bring the Israeli people back into their homes. Well, if you're not going to use diplomacy, that only leaves one other option, and that is to try and use a military solution to force Hezbollah, and you would have to do it across a large row. I'll show you a map here shortly, all the way back to the Litani River, about 25 kilometers north of that border. It's a huge, huge swath of territory that would have to be pushed back, and it require enormous military resources. But that's what Israel is trying to do. And so here, I believe it was yesterday, you had Yoav Gallant make an additional comment about what they're going to do.
Our goal is to safely return the residents of the north back to their homes. As time goes by, Hezbollah will pay an increasing price.
So obviously now then you have right around that time, you have, first of all, this pager event where the pagers used by many of the Hezbollah fighters and many others, to include, ironically, the Iranian ambassador, who also apparently was a victim of this, where the pagers blew up in their pockets. It blew up in hands. That there have been, by current reports, both the first and the second round of these things, because it happened on 2 consecutive days. 34 people were killed, and I think somewhere over 3,000 were wounded in the process. And as you're going to see here in a minute, that this has been a significant in damage done to the Hezbollah side. And I'll get into more details of that in a minute as well. But so those things happen first. Then you have this overnight large airstrike. And there was also reportedly lots of artillery and missiles in the southern part of Lebanon as well. So it was a tactical situation. Now just hours ago, we have this strike on the senior leadership of the military in Beirut. By all accounts, this is a preparation of the battlefield. And in fact, this analyst from Deutsche Welle said early this morning that her estimation is that diplomacy has been shut down.
We are seeing a major escalation of the conflict now, and you are right in saying that both parties, since the start of the conflict, have been saying they want to avoid an all-out war, which might potentially spread to the Middle East at large. What we're seeing now, though, is the change in the Israeli rhetoric. We've heard Israeli officials saying that they no longer believe in a diplomatic solution to the conflict in the border area between Lebanon and Israel. So what we might see now is that the Israelis are preparing to use a military operation to force Hezbollah away from the border area.
And that was reinforced when we have information here in just the last in a couple of days that the 98th Division, the Israeli 98th Division, has been redeployed from the Gaza Strip, where it has been fighting, up to the Lebanese border. Other forces are also being moved closer to the border. There's been lots of videos passed of Israeli armored vehicles being shipped up to the border. So you take all this together, and it really does look like Israel has made a decision that they are going to invade southern Lebanon and attempt to drive Hezbollah back to the border. Now, that is going to be really, really hard, much more difficult than I think anybody in the West or the IDF seem to be thinking. And that's also something we want to talk into some detail here. But before we get to that, definitions are important. So you heard that analyst there on Deutsche Welle say, yes, it seems that the Israelis are saying diplomacy is dead. You're going to hear some Israeli officials say that in a minute as well. Their ambassador to the United Nations, in fact. They keep talking about diplomacy. Well, let me explain to you what they mean when they say diplomacy. The Israeli side position has been actually for quite some time that a long years ago UN resolution that actually helped to broker the end of the 2006 Israeli-Lebanon war was that the Hezbollah side would have to redeploy north of the Litani River. That never happened. And in fact, in the years since that time, the Hezbollah has completely remained in that area. And in fact, they've deepened their ability to defend themselves, made defensive positions and the like, moved lots of rockets and other kinds of weapons into the area, both shoulder-fired missiles, certainly small arms, machine guns, and the like, but also lots of rockets and missiles. Now, they have a lot more than the Hamas side had that was also used to fire into Israel during that incursion, especially shortly after 10/7 last year. This is a much, much more difficult nut to crack. But Israel has been so-called seeking a negotiated settlement. But what they mean is essentially surrender. They want Hezbollah to surrender and voluntarily leave all of their positions and go north of the Litani River. If that happens, they say, then there won't have to be an incursion. But what that is an absolute requirement to surrender, unconditional surrender and move. And of course, that's not going to happen. There's no realistic possibility, nor does Israel think there is. When they keep using these terms, negotiated settlement, they're trying to make themselves sound like they're a reasonable party. We just want to talk. We just want to move people, to an area where our people are safe. And that's all we're asking for. But they're not willing to negotiate in good faith. They're not willing to surrender, is what they're saying. So now then it looks like everything is in place now for this to go on. So first they attacked the communication systems of Hezbollah. Now then they're trying to take out their senior leadership. And then you see they're massing on the border. That's the only thing left here so far. And they're having these airstrikes and attacks deep into the Hezbollah forces throughout southern Lebanon, actually even up into some other parts where they think they're launching vehicles, launch tubes, etc. So you're probably going to see more of that in the coming days. And then there's almost certainly going to be the ground incursion, because it's impossible to just use air power alone to quell the situation here. You can't defeat a dug-in enemy in the especially in the hills and the kind of terrain that they have with just air power. It just won't work. Israel doesn't have it. As an interesting fact from the 2006 war, Israel, and it was only a month, by the way. They say 2006, but it was only a month from July to August of 2006. Israel launched somewhere north of 11,000 airstrikes in that month in southern Lebanon, and they nearly ran out of ammunition. And that was a key thing there. Now, just imagine this time it's going to be coming at the end of 11 months of fighting inside the Gaza Strip, where they have used an enormous amount of ammunition. Of course, they're getting an enormous amount from the United States too, but our inventories are also limited. So if they're going to think that they're going to launch another incursion up in here, and by the way, the reason that one ended after a month is because Israel realized there was no tactical solution to this. They were not going to be able to defeat the Hezbollah and achieve anything that they could stay with. So they said, well, we better withdraw back. And that's why they were so willing to have a negotiated settlement after such a short period of time, because they harmed Hezbollah, but they knew that they couldn't defeat them. And so instead of trying, they came back. Now, I don't know why they're going to be thinking the conditions are any different today, because by all accounts, militarily, it's much, much more difficult now, because Hezbollah has been spending years and years, like well over a decade, of building defensible positions. They have gotten, by all accounts, like concrete bunkers they have dug. They have certainly created lots of booby traps. They're prepared to lay anti-armor mines, just like they did in 2006. And I'm going to show you some comments from one of the reports of what the Israelis faced inside Lebanon in 2006. And I assure you that what I'll read to you then is only much stronger today. And what's different also about this one is that the Lebanon now has a huge inventory of rockets and missiles that are more capable than the ones that they had in 2006. It remains to be seen whether Hezbollah will launch in a full-on war and just unleash all of these missiles onto Israel. But I think everything's going to depend on what happens with the ground incursion. Once that happens, then you may see Hezbollah take the gloves off, which right now they haven't done. In fact, what's going on right now on the Hezbollah side is that they are hurting. And in fact, here was a expert from the Middle East that's talking about just how much Israel, the Hezbollah side, is hurting.
There is a saying in Arabic: you can make strength out of weakness, but the fact is here. Like yesterday, a large number of Hezbollah operatives are now out of the course of action. They cannot operate anymore. And let's recall as well that up to now, and the war did not start, Hezbollah has lost twice. The price he has paid is twice as big as what he endured during 2006 war. And still, the war did not start yet. More than 400 people have been dead, and more than 3,000 wounded people. This is a huge price up to now.
Now, that's what he's saying. Since this war has started, that the Hezbollah side has suffered 400 killed, and he said 3,000 wounded. Apparently, it's even more than that when you look at the pager strike, too, when you're adding on top of that, because the Hezbollah side has suffered a lot more casualties than the Israeli side has. And you're going to see in a graphic I'm going to show in a minute why that might be. The firepower is certainly enormous. But when you talk about also the fact that they've lost all their communications gear and now they're afraid of any kind of technology, I suspect that is one of the reasons why Israel was successful, being able to knock out that high-ranking commander today, because now that Israel or Hezbollah is having to use different means of communication, stuff that may not be as secret, and Israel is probably listening into everything. So now instead of their old form, they're having to figure out something new, which means they could be compromised. So everything is up in the air for the Hezbollah side right now. They know that if Israel comes across, it's going to be a really ugly fight. But here's the thing. According to what Nasrallah said, and almost it can't be any other way, they're prepared for what's coming. Here's what he said a couple of days ago on what he viewed as the results of the pager strike.
It is nothing but a massacre, and this is the word that we are going to adopt, massacre, to be added to the Israeli enemy's crimes and massacres perpetrated over decades since the creation of this cancerous entity in our region. It is an act of war against the people of Lebanon, Lebanon's sovereignty. It is a declaration of war. It is an act of war and can be characterized as such.
Okay, so here's the next situation. The question is, what is Hezbollah going to do? We know what Israel wants, and you're going to hear them from their own mouth in just a second. They want Hezbollah to just lay down and quit. They want them to surrender, move north of the Litani River, and never bother them again. That's what they want. But they're killing large numbers of Lebanese people, whether Hezbollah or otherwise. Lots of people are dying. Innocent people are died in the Beirut strike today with kids. Some kids were killed in the pager strike. And so the population throughout Lebanon is terrified right now, and they're scared to death. But as we have seen throughout human history, I mean, you can take virtually any situation. I can't myself think of any place where you hit somebody really hard and then they just surrendered and quit and gave up and just laid down. That rarely happens. I think probably the closest I can see is in the Balkans after a long air campaign. Milosevic, I think it was the leader at that time, finally gave in and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and surrender. That was one of the few times that I've actually seen somebody surrender. But the idea that Hezbollah, with their ideology, is going to lay down I think is not just remote, but impossible. And in fact, Nasrallah also added this about what they're willing to do.
After all these attacks, I clearly say that whatever the sacrifices and whatever the consequences, the resistance in Lebanon will not stop backing and supporting the people of Gaza, the West Bank, and the vulnerable in this holy land.
Now, you can certainly understand from the position, they're afraid, they've been hurt, and their capacity has been diminished because of the communications issue right now. So they're definitely vulnerable. But the idea that they're going to quit just seems fanciful. Because let me explain to you how it's working especially in the southern part. These groups, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or ISIS or Al Qaeda, they're always built with the idea that you can lose the head, that you can lose leadership at all these different levels, but that there's autonomous cells everywhere else. Everybody is understanding that they have a role to play, and if the communications get cut off, there's certain things that they can do in their area. And that's how it was in the 2006 war, and that is definitely how it is set up in this current situation here now, to where if Israel comes in, they will still have to physically unseat these people and move them out. And I promise you that these people have been suffering for a long time. Lebanon is actually in economic freefall. They have 40% unemployment right now. So there's a lot of suffering already among the entire population. And they will defend themselves and do whatever they can because they're afraid. And scared people rarely just quit and lay down to the aggressor. Usually they say, I've got nothing left to lose. I'm going to continue to resist anyway. And Israel doesn't seem to understand that. In fact, they're really full with a lot of, I think, unsubstantiated confidence. And here is a former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, was on an American program, and he was asked, okay, now all this stuff has happened here, is there any room for negotiation? What's next?
If you were prime minister right now, knowing what Nasrallah has now said, vowing to retaliate, claiming that all red lines have been crossed here, would you have given the order to Mossad to say, okay, carry something out like this inside of Lebanon? Or do you think this really does put Israel in a position where there could be a full-fledged war on the northern border?
Well, I have news. There already is a full-fledged war. Imagine the state of Florida being evacuated by all its people and having 8,000 rockets shot at Florida and Miami and everywhere there, killing children in Florida. That's exactly our situation. And we did nothing to Hezbollah. We've been restraining ourselves, and the attack tonight of the IDF on 1,000 rocket barrels, I think, should be the beginning. But we need to hit Hezbollah, push him away from our border, and defend our people. If anything, this is way, way too late, attacking these rocket barrels tonight.
Okay, so remember that one phrase you just said there, that we've done nothing to Hezbollah. I don't know what their deal is. That they keep hitting us and doing all these things, and now, of course, what are we going to do? And you heard him very clearly say we should push Hezbollah back, right? So key important thing there. Now, here was last night, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations was being just about as direct and maybe a little bit more.
Now, when we're getting to a year from October 7, the Israeli public, the Israeli government decided to add another goal to the goals of the war, is to allow the people of the north to go back home. And in order to do that, we will have to mobilize our strengths, stretch our muscles, and push them back.
So you keep hearing that same phrase, and push them back. That tells you unambiguously, especially when you've seen what Yoav Gallant has had to say, they are definitely preparing for a ground incursion. There's no other way to push back. Bombs won't do that. So by every account that you want to look at, whether it's statements or whether it's physical action on the ground, they are getting ready to go in. Now, I want to look at specifically what they were talking about there a minute ago about how they've done nothing, that Hezbollah is just being mean guys and shooting rockets down for no good reason. Not quite that way. Here is a map, actually, where it shows a lot of these cross-border attacks. This is from October 7th up through July 31st here. And what you're seeing on this map here is the border area between Lebanon and Israel. And if you probably can't read a lot of that small print there, but what you see is these orange strikes are Hezbollah rocket strikes in and other mortars, fires, etc., into Israel. And the blue ones are Israeli strikes into Lebanon. And as you look and see on those numbers up at the top there, you'll see that Israeli strikes 7,033 into Lebanon, and Lebanon and Hezbollah in return 1,500. So when you hear Israel say we've done nothing, they have done 7 times almost more attacks into Hezbollah and into Lebanon, and killing all kinds of other people there as well, not just the Hezbollah fighters. So when you see that, you see this is a general air campaign that's been going on for a long time, and obviously it has not had the desired effect. So that's why I tell you that it's not going to just be bombing and airstrikes. The only way Israel can accomplish this is to move in and attack them. And I also want to show you when they talk about people suffering. Oh, actually, Gary, before you show that, can you bring up that tweet from the Israeli President Herzog, because this is also important here. This is just hours ago, I believe. Yeah, that was earlier today, this morning, our time. He said, I repeat again and again, we did not want this war. We do not want war. Not today, not ever. But we are entitled to the most basic rights any nation to live like any other people in peace, security, tranquility, and bring our sons and daughters back home. The hostages back to their families, and the displaced citizens in the north and south to their homes and schools and businesses. Okay, well, fair enough as far as it goes. Who wouldn't want that? But when you say you don't want war, and yet you're not willing to do anything to have even a ceasefire or even attempt a negotiated settlement, if a negotiated settlement means a win-win situation, or that each side will at least get something it wants, that is what Israel is not willing to do. What you've heard from the ambassador, from the former prime minister, and now from the current president, they want all the stuff they want, and they want to give nothing in return. So they want Hezbollah to completely withdraw and surrender, and they want to give nothing. They want their people to be able to move back in, and they're not concerned about people on the northern side. But here, now, Gary, put that second map back up. As you can see, the map, this is again the border area between the two countries. On the left, you see this red area where all the Lebanese people have been driven out of all of their homes in this area. So it's basically been evacuated. And then on the right, you see it's about a 5-kilometer strip on the Israeli side where they have also been evacuated. So when Herzog is talking about that people deserve this, well, which people? But is he going to suggest that only the Israeli people deserve this and want this and peace, etc.? Because what he's basically laying out right now, the entire Israeli government, is that they are prepared to take peace from anyone north of the border because they don't like it. And here's the thing, you've got the power, so you're going to try to take it. And listen, I've said this from the very beginning of the war, and I'll say it again today, especially on the eve of this probably new incursion into southern Lebanon. Israel is pursuing a political objective with military means that will not and cannot succeed. It cannot. They're going to fail at this because they don't have the manpower. They don't. The Israeli side, as big as their air force is, as great as their fighter pilots are, as effective as their airstrikes are, and their intelligence, obviously off the charts effective right now. This whole issue with the pager and the walkie-talkies has never been done on this scale before. It's actually incredibly impressive from a tradecraft perspective, but even that is causing damage. But now then, like everything else that happens in war, the other side will figure it out, and then they'll come up with a new way to communicate. And ironically, it's going to potentially cost Israel, because now then they're not going to have access to a lot of the information that they did before, because Hezbollah will find a new way to communicate. So they'll recover from this and then move on like people always do when they're under fire. But the issue on the front, though, is the biggest error. What they have done, the Israeli side has done in the Gaza Strip, has been disastrous, but it hasn't been catastrophic, because they're big enough and powerful enough that they can just keep on what's called mowing the grass. And every time an insurgent comes up, they can kill them and just keep going, even though they create more. But these insurgents don't have the ability to actually harm Israel very much. Their casualties in comparison have been minuscule from the IDF side in comparison to what they've inflicted. You go into southern Lebanon, however, and it is a whole new ballgame. And I'm going to show you some of the reason why. Here's a study from the United States Command and General Staff College from 2010 that was looking at the 2006 Lebanese war. And the study revealed that Israel went to war without having clearly defined its critical political, diplomatic, or military goals and objectives. And then they continue to add that despite the superb performance of the Israeli Air Force, sound familiar, air power and technology proved to be inconclusive and a poor substitute for a well-trained, resolute maneuver force directly engaging enemy forces. Now, what Israel found out when they went into Lebanon in 2006 was that even though they had little regard for the Hezbollah fighters, they actually performed quite well. And it was a big problem for Israel. And Gary, if you can throw up that Battle of Bint Jbeil, this was one of the early fights that was taking place, one of the first tactical engagements here. And I want to read you from a separate report about what happened at this place, Bint Jbeil. I'm going to show you where that is on a bigger map in just a second, but let me read this to you because it's very, very instructive about what they would face going in here. It said that on the first day of the battle, companies A and C of the 51st Battalion ran into a withering array of Hezbollah small arms, machine guns, rocket propelled grenades, anti-tank missiles, mortars, and short-range rockets. An ambush from hell, quote, is how one of the Israeli soldiers described the first contact. Quote, the Hezbollah men were in upper stories of building, another soldier remembered, and a commanding view of the IDF force. In the initial firing, 30 members of Company C, 1/3 of its total strength, were hit, as was the battalion's deputy commander. Company A also sustained 5 casualties. As the fighting intensified, Hezbollah squads maneuvered onto their flanks and continued to deliver a multitude of direct and indirect fires. And it continues to go on from there. Now, I want to go to this map that I have actually from, sorry, pushed the wrong button there. This is actually from Google Earth. I want to show you what that place actually looks like, because it's really instructive. This is Bint Jbeil. This is where you saw on that map just a second ago. This is the high ground that you saw that was talked about where some of the fighting was going on, and this was some of the areas here. So this is on, of course, north of the border. Here's the border between Lebanon and Israel that we're talking about here. But just look at a lot of this terrain that you can see here. This is a 3D rendering. And so even to get there, you have to go through these valleys. And of course, what happened in the 2006 wars in many places was even the best Merkava tanks were ambushed when they would go through some of these small defilades like this where they don't have room to maneuver. And the Hezbollah fighters could pop up from some of these ridges and rain down anti-tank missiles. They would mine some of the roads here, and then they would have set ambushes when the tank columns would get bogged down, and then it would turn into a free-for-all. And then even in Bent Jabil, in the town itself, like all these other ones there, I mean, you can just see all of the buildings and the small. I mean, this looks, again, like the Gaza Strip. And you've seen how many people it took just to go through, like, say, Gaza City at the beginning of the war. And that is nothing compared to what they would have to do in this area here, because it's all over the place. And again, that's not even taught. Just the ground incursion itself is going to be extremely difficult. But they're not prepared for that. Israel, again, it seems like one of the key quotes from the study was that the Israeli were disconnected from their political and their tactical objectives. That's from 2006. Another study I read from 1994 talked about Israel historically having a problem with that. So you see, the same thing I have observed about this one is an endemic problem with how Israel fights its war. They're motivated by things that happen right now, and they want to strike and they want to take action right now. They want to solve the problem, but they haven't counted the cost. They haven't said, what will it take to succeed? What will it take to win? And I'm just telling you, even if they hit, a bunch more of the commanders, there's always going to be somebody that can replace them. If Iran doesn't get involved in this one, and Iran didn't get involved in the 2006 war, so it's no guarantee that they're going to engage here. They may talk about that in a second. But for Israel's side, even if Iran stays out of this and they don't come in, Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets and missiles. So if Israel starts a ground incursion, if the Hezbollah side was smart and was be willing to be patient, what they could do is allow Israel to make an incursion and to get sucked in and to get bogged down in some of these, like Ben Jabil and some of these other cities and villages and towns in the area. Because it's going to be very expensive in personnel. It's going to be very expensive in air power, bombs and missiles, artillery. I mean, even small arms ammunition. And then you got a much, much higher chance of suffering casualties. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, they will probably in some way communicate with some of their fighters there to continue to cause Israel problems there and to continue fighting so that they can't remove more troops from that area, and they'll have to overextend themselves. At that point, then Hezbollah could suddenly start raining down, a massive amount of missiles and rockets. The Iron Dome doesn't have enough interceptors. It cannot handle a barrage like that. And all of a sudden, you may have Israeli cities, Israeli military sites, units, headquarters of their own will be vulnerable and exposed. And there could be tremendous damage. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. That's the takeaway from this. Israel is trying to project strength. That interview with Bennett there was saturated with arrogance, talking like, yeah, they're just going to squash the Hezbollah and then everything's going to be over. Well, they didn't squash Hamas after nearly a year of fighting. And to think that you're going to take on a new enemy and everything's going to be okay is just wishful thinking. And now then, if the other projection doesn't happen and Iran doesn't stay out, if they now join in the fighting, and especially if the scenario I just drew there, where Israel was bogged down, they're suffering casualties, they're spread on now a north and a south front, and all of a sudden here comes a bunch of rockets that saturate the Iron Dome and make it weak. What do you think Iran's going to do? Do you think Iran's going to just sit there quiet and say Israel is now at their most strategic vulnerability and we're going to do nothing? Now, I'll say they may come to that conclusion because, although they'll never say it out loud, you had Jimmy Carter confirm Israel has nuclear weapons. And if they start to lose, it is not inconceivable that they could deploy them against Iran. If they get to a position to where they think, oh crap, we're not invulnerable, we are seriously vulnerable here, and now then here comes Iranian missiles, because they are quite capable in some of their ballistic missiles. They probably are even more so today, because there's very likely that Russia has given them some of their better air defense systems, and probably also some of their Iskander missiles and some of these other kind of things that the Israel won't be able to defend against. And it's not inconceivable that Israel, faced with that kind of threat, could resort to nuclear weapons. All of that is possible here. Now, what should the United States do? That's where our next problem is, because we have become so feckless and unwilling to use our leverage and our support, and we have literally handed over control of what happens in the Middle East, not to any policies that we want, but to whatever Benjamin Netanyahu chooses. Here is what I believe it was yesterday that Matt Miller was trying to explain and how things are unfolding right now.
As long as Hezbollah is launching terrorist attacks across the border, of course Israel is going to launch military action to defend itself, as any country would. What we continue to push to all the parties is not to escalate the conflict, not to let it spiral out of control into a war that we don't think serves either side's interests, and to ultimately try to get to the point, try to let us get to a ceasefire in Gaza that would help bring calm across the blue line.
What is he even talking about? Try to get to a ceasefire? I mean, how many times does Netanyahu have to look in your face and tell you no? He went on Fox News a couple of weeks back, and when asked expressly about the ceasefire that our Secretary of State had said Israel had agreed to, and we're just trying to get Hamas to get to yes, he said no, absolutely not. Just point blank, no. We're not anywhere close to a ceasefire, because like the same kind of things that exist here, Netanyahu's view there is that we'll negotiate a ceasefire as long as Hamas completely surrenders and does everything we want them to, which that's just not how negotiations work. That's called an abject surrender. And right now you haven't destroyed Hamas's will to resist, so they're going to continue fighting. But yet here is Matt Miller saying we're trying to keep this from escalating. So he's like, yeah, I know that we're firing across the border and doing all this assassination stuff, but we're trying to tell all parties, don't escalate this into a full war. I mean that's just as ridiculous as it can be to even say as a set policy, because we're like, yeah, fire a little bit, just not a whole bunch. So keep it at the low. Well, whose interest does that serve? I mean, it could serve ours. Yeah, if we don't want there to be any war and we don't want to have to deal with an escalation still, sure, that would be good for us. But how willing do you think that Hamas and Hezbollah and potentially Iran are going to do? Yeah, whatever works for you guys, we're all in on that. Well, in my view, it got a little bit worse over at the White House when you had John Kirby on the same day yesterday. Well, just watch. Here's a question the reporter put to him, and just cringe at this answer.
Everyone keeps urging, all parties involved not to escalate this. Isn't this an escalation already? I mean, isn't this Israel doing exactly what you've been warning them not to do?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the details of these incidents. I understand that's frustrating. I get it. And I understand where all your questions are coming from. They're all valid. They're all fair. I'm just not going to get into this. I will add, if I could, and restate a little bit to what I said to Gabe. We still don't want to see an escalation of any kind. We don't believe that the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations at all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy, which is why Mr. Hochstein was over in the region this week. And we're still going to pursue those kinds of outcomes.
Well, why are you going to tie American interests to a hope that Israel's going to do something when for 11 consecutive months they've done nothing that you've wanted? When you see with your own eyes, and you've got to have more intelligence than I do. I'm just looking at the pieces that are moving around on the battlefield that are visible that anyone can see. You've got classified information. But everything that we see shows, and you've seen from the leaders of Israel themselves, they're getting ready to push back, quote, the Hezbollah side, which can only be done with a ground incursion. All these things that have happened so far that within even the last hours, as I pointed out, are precursor steps and basically preparation of the battlefield to deprive the enemy of their communications and their senior leaders and to make life difficult for them before you go in on the ground. That's the only thing that's remaining. And we've seen they're moving forces up into the border area right now. So you see everything. And now you still, though, want to say, we think a negotiated settlement would be good. Well, Admiral Kirby, how many times do you have to be told no? Because you just see how feckless this makes the United States of America look. I mean, we've shown you this clip a bunch of times from President Biden where he talks about, we shape events. We shape global events. We're the greatest power on the planet. We lead things. We don't wait for anybody. And yet here our ally, our supposed ally, this tiny country of like whatever it is, 8 million, is explicitly telling us what to do. They are running the show and we're doing nothing about it. And it just defies understanding and common sense and logic that we're putting ourselves in a position to where, especially if Iran does make good on its threat. And by the way, even outside of all of this, we're still waiting on Iran to respond from the assassination of Hania on the 31st of July in Tehran. They were still promising, and they reiterated it just a week or so ago, that there will be a response to come from that. So on top of all this, we're also waiting for Iran to do something to Israel for a combination of having destroyed one of their embassy compounds in Syria and assassinating that person in their capital city. Now, if that happens, we have said we're going to defend Israel. I mean, like physically defend them. We've done it already once, I think back in April, when we used the U.S. Air Force flying off of our aircraft carriers to actually shoot down Iranian missiles. Now, that didn't actually return any fire into Iran, but can we promise that wouldn't happen, especially if any of our jets in subsequent or future events are actually attacked? That's a different case. That didn't happen last time. But we could all too easily get sucked into a war. And where would this go? I mean, if you've been watching our channel, you've seen some recent shows we put that shows that our ammunition and weapons stockpiles are really low. We don't even have enough missile interceptors to be able to meet the quota and the sales that we've made to other countries around the world and still give them to Ukraine. And now then you're talking about possibly opening up a new war front here. And I assure you, I promise you, the needs that Israel has had so far in its fight against Hamas is nothing compared to the much higher in quantity and concentration of weapons and ammunition that they're going to need to fight this much harder battle in southern Lebanon. So that demand will also go up. Where's that going to come from? You see what I'm saying? Everywhere you want to look, there's compounding problems. And we are in real risk of getting strategically overstretched to the breaking point. We're already overstretched, I mean, by any definition. But you get in a situation here, and especially if we get sucked into the war itself, folks, I'm just telling you, we don't have the ammunition to fight a war right now. We're so stretched around the world, unless you totally shut down the Russia-Ukraine war and stop sending weapons and ammunition anywhere else, and then go on a full-on mobilization of industry in the United States, like a full wartime footing, which would take probably years to be able to get to. I mean, that's what you're left to face with. Why would you want to get to that point? All you have to do is tell Israel, cool it. If you go into Lebanon, this is what we should do. If you invade into southern Lebanon, you are on your own. If Israel attacks in response in support of their allies there in Hezbollah, you're on your own. If you start a war with Hezbollah and with Iran, you're going to do it by yourself. Do not count on any support from us. You're not getting it. That kind of leverage, if we mean it, could bring the finally negotiations into a rational place to where you have give and take, like they did in 2006. There was give and take, and they got to a ceasefire and a settlement. Now, of course, it was squandered over the years because Israel continued to not do anything to try to eliminate the cause of that conflict itself. And certainly everything that's taken place in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank is just continued to keep that roiled. So that's a separate issue. So to those who may say, well, yeah, you had a ceasefire before it and then the war kicked up again. And, who's to say it won't in the future? Fair enough. That depends on what happens after the ceasefire. Every situation gets its opportunity to do the right thing. You get your chance to actually have a good negotiations and have a good diplomacy with give and take, so that the other side has reason to hope and reason to avoid going into conflict. But Israel hasn't attempted that yet, and we now see the bitter fruit of those policies. And if we want to see it get worse, just keep on the back burner and just keep on with your arms crossed and just keep promising. I saw that President Biden made a comment just before we came on air here that basically is continuing with the impotent stuff that, well, we hope this and we would like to see that, but you're not going to take any action. I'm telling you, if you're a friend of Israel, if you genuinely want what's the best for the Israeli people, now is the time to tell them to stop, to tell them point blank, we're not going to support that. This is a foolish endeavor you're going down here, and there's many practical military reasons why that is. And if you go down this path, it will not have success. There is no chance in God's earth, in my view, that you can physically eliminate all of the Hezbollah fighters south of the Litani River any more than you can physically eliminate all of the people who don't like you in the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and you see the wreckage of that. And you want to create more of that wreckage, even if we gave them everything they asked for, even if Israel stayed out, you're not going to succeed. And then what are you going to do? Even if you drove up to the Litani River, now what? Are you just going to stop there? Are you going to reoccupy it? Remember, they occupied it from 1982 until 2000, 18 bitter years of futility. And it was an enormous cost to the Israeli economy, one of the other reasons why they withdrew there. So that's not going to solve anything. This won't solve their problem. It won't. It'll just create much, much more animosity. And it can go anywhere from an utter failure to a catastrophe, a regional catastrophe. And all those things are on the table right now. And they're going to continue to be until we do something to stop it. That's your deep dive for today. We're going to come back later this afternoon. We're going to have an Intel brief update, one of our more popular features here. Also to remind you that we are now on podcast. For those of you who may not have the time to watch a video all the time or want to listen to in your car as you're driving to work, just wherever you find your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you will find our treasures there. Thank you very much. And we'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.